It's two people caught up in two normal people caught up in a conspiracy that resonates from hundreds of years ago. It's to do with a Templar manuscript that hid a great secret that some neo-Templars, right-wing, nasty group of people are trying to get the secret, and for various reasons, George and Nico have to get there first.
Nico, I've seen them.
Who?
The Templars. I spied on their meeting in the catacombs.
And you...
It's like an adventure, because it's all about solving puzzles and then going around, but it's also, it's got the investigation as well, so it doesn't really have the equivalent genre in a movie. It's at the highest level, it's an adventure, but it's a conspiracy adventure, perhaps, if there was such a genre. I'd hope that people would think of it as an intelligent game.
Mimes and guns don't usually go together, but I had an idea that this was no ordinary mime.
The original Broken Swords started with George being caught up in an explosion he knows nothing about. Somebody's assassinated. He gets to meet Nico, and they go on their adventures. What we do is we actually start a day beforehand, and Nico has actually experienced something beforehand. Now, what I need to emphasize is that this is a standalone game, so you do not need to have played Broken Sword at all. But if you have, what you'll find is that there's a lot that starts before. In that day, Nico experiences the murder of somebody else, and that then interweaves with the original game. So you'll find suddenly that the original game starts, and I was keen to use, to change nothing at all from the original game. So that was fact. And then later it resonates in, so it sort of juxtaposes the old and the new. But one of the key things was to decide that everything that went before was a fact and couldn't be changed. So what I had to do was come up with a story that actually allowed us to tell the story without actually affecting the feeling of the game the first time round, so that it fitted quite well. Now, I won't tell you why, but it basically puts Nico under an enormous emotional pressure, because there has to be a reason why she didn't discuss that with George first time round. In other words, all of this happened in the first game, it's just we didn't tell you about it.
I am so sorry for your loss, madam.
No, you're not. You're a journalist. Journalists don't feel sorry.
Not true.
We shall see.
What we've put in is a hint system, where if the game thinks that you're stuck, it'll flash a little question mark, and you can choose to click on it. And there are between 3 and 5 different hints, all getting more and more obvious, until finally we just give you the answer. And that means that, and what was great is that people feel, we do count the number of times that you've you've accessed hints. So there is a sort of motivation. So there isn't. We don't do anything negative if you take lots of hints, but there is a sort of motivation not to go for too many hints. And so people can choose. They can either play it as hardcore and not have any hints at all, or they can play it like an interactive movie and just play all the way through. And whenever they get stuck, just go for hints. And that actually has worked very, very well.
There was a tiny hole in the tabletop. Part of the inlay had been chipped away.
I got a lot of flack, as you may know, about the goat puzzle the first time round. And the reason I got flack was because the goat puzzle was, in truth, a little bit unfair, because we actually changed the interface.
Aha! Nico, you are just so damn good at this stuff.
The approach was that actually we wanted a few really difficult puzzles, because otherwise people complained that they went through too fast. Now things are slightly different, but we've gone through and we've refined some of the puzzles and made them a little bit fairer. And we've added a diary that's another. And there are loads of little things. So there's a diary, so you can actually go and it keeps a record of what's happened to that point. And George notes, after the goat puzzle, he actually notes himself that he was sort of expecting it to be so much harder and convoluted, but actually it was surprisingly easy.
Would you like to read my newspaper?
I haven't got time to read that. Can't you see I'm busy?
You could read it on your lunch break.
We also, of course, have the facial expressions that we put in both into the DS and the Wii. And those have been drawn by Dave Gibbons.
Charles got in touch with me because one thing that I think he'd seen from Watchmen was that I was able to create believable worlds, backgrounds that engaging characters could move around in. And he was really interested to see how that could transfer to games.
And the facial expressions, the reason that I was keen for those is because I think you've got to empathise with the characters. and by producing beautifully drawn characters with a range of expressions. And they all animate, and quite simply like blink and just a little bit of animation, but we can convey the feeling of the expression that is being depicted in a particular conversation.
And particularly on a platform like the DS, with the split screen thing, there was a facility that you could get a closer look at the characters. You could get closer to them emotionally as well, because you could see their faces as they emoted the various things. And so my main task was to actually, you know, convert these little pixelated characters into, you know, drawn close-ups that could be animated and have a range of convincing emotion and be seen from different angles and interact with one another. And that to me was, you know, a really interesting thing to do.
And that really adds an awful lot. So on the DS, that takes up the top screen. On the Wii, we actually print them in the conversation. So that's a really major advance as well. On the Wii, we were able to go back to the original assets. So we have high-res screens, 16-bit rather than the original, which was 200 colors. So, you know, graphically, you know, it looks quite different.
I'm really interested in visual storytelling, which is what comics are, what movies are, and what video games are as well. The thing that we found worked really well was we did a comic book. I wrote and drew a kind of, I think it was a 6-page comic book that kind of filled people in or introduced people to what was happening in the story. In Beneath a Steel Sky, it started off with a kind of an origin of the main character, Foster, and ended on a real cliffhanger that you could then put down the comic and start to play the game. And it meant that you could fill in quite a lot of background quite easily, that people wouldn't have to play through all the background, that you wouldn't have to begin the game with kind of endless streams of screens of the story so far. And so Charles suggested we do that with Broken Sword, which we've done. I've written the comic book and I've drawn it. You do with a video game have that extra facility of movement, of sound, and of course involvement with the reader. The trick with all these media is to draw the reader in, to make them forget that they're watching or reading something, but they're actually a part of it.
We've tried to avoid the cliches that video games so often fall into. So I would hope that, one, people would find the story really compelling, the characters interesting and exciting and empathetic, that they'd be fascinated by the background, and hopefully, you know, again, the idea that it's intelligent, that at the end of it you feel really that, you know, not only have you been told a great story in an interactive way, but that actually you've come across really interesting challenges that you've got to overcome.
Even in death, Imelda looked the same. Beautiful, inscrutable, the Ice Queen alone in her ice palace. I opened it. Inside was a tiny gold key. I took the key. I had to leave. I knew I could never return.